Rectangles and ellipses are obviously some of the more common shapes that we might want to draw onto an HTML5 canvas, whether it's for a game, charting, or other application. So in this section, I'm going to focus on the different functions and the properties you can use to render these types of common shapes. Now, earlier in the first module, you saw a complete set of all the functions available. And at first glance, if you're new to the canvas and really have never touched any of the functions, it might feel a little bit overwhelming. So what I've done is broke these down into the functions that relate to each section. So we're going to talk about rectangles and ellipses in this section, and you can see there's really not that many functions available that you have to worry about to draw these types of things. In fact, it's pretty easy, you'll see. So first off, there is no ellipse or circle function built into the canvas, but there is something called arc and arc2, and those can be used to do the equivalent of a circle or different types of shapes, ellipses. We can also do things with rectangles. We can fill a rectangle, clear it. We can just draw a generic rectangle which could be filled or stroked with an outer border color, and we can even stroke a rectangle. So some of these functions, such as stroke and fill, they can be used to fill a rectangle that might have been rendered or fill an arc that might have been rendered. Whereas things like stroke rect, obviously we'll draw a border around a rectangle, whereas fill rect will automatically fill with a specific color, and you'll see it'll default to black if you don't specify a color. So let's take a closer look at some of these functions and what the parameters are that you can pass into these. So here's a quick look at the rectangle functions, and you can see that they all are pretty simple because they take XY coordinates of where to start the upper left corner of the rectangle, the width of the rectangle, and the height of the rectangle. So they all take these same exact parameters, so it's very, very simple to get started with. The clear rect is used normally when you want to clear a canvas or a section of a canvas. For instance, you might have a block that's 100 pixels wide by 100 pixels tall, and you want to clear whatever's in the specific area out. Well, you could use clear rect to do that. Fill rect does what it says. It fills a rectangle with a specific color that you'll provide. Rect just draws a rectangle, but if you only use it on its own, you won't see much. You need to either stroke the outer border of it or fill it with the stroke or the fill functions. And then finally, stroke rect is a little bit different than fill. Fill is actually like coloring in the entire contents of the rectangle, whereas stroke rect only strokes the outer border or renders the outer border with a specific stroke color, which we'll talk about. So we can set the colors of the fill or the stroke using a fill style or a stroke style. So you can give it an RGBA type color, or you can give it a hex, or you could even just give it a name color if you want, such as red. And what that will do is, as we call fill rect, as long as we set the fill style first to something like red, then fill rect will automatically fill using that color. So I like to think of it as we dip the 2D context that we talked about in the first module into a specific color, and we do that using fill style or stroke style. Then we go ahead and perform the action, such as fill rect or stroke rect, and that's like picking up your paintbrush, moving it up to the canvas, and now actually filling it in, or just drawing the outer border of the particular rectangle in this case. Now we also have different arc or ellipse type functions. Now, as I mentioned, there is no ellipse or circle functions per se, but you can accomplish the same thing with the arc or the arc2. So the arc is a little more complex, and you can see it takes the XY coordinates of where to start drawing the circle. Now, the circle is rendered by default from the center point of the circle, and how far it goes out is determined by the radius. And so you'll say, I want to go in 100 pixels by, say, 100 pixels, and we'd go over 100, down 100. That would render here, and then if I had a radius of 50, we'd get a circle about that big, right in that area. Now the start angle is where do we want to render the circle and start drawing. And we can start at 0, for instance, or we could draw some other type of shape somewhere else if we wanted. The end angle is where do we end the circle, as far as the angle of that. And we'd probably want to go 360 degrees, obviously, if we wanted a full, complete circle. And then anti-clockwise is do we want to render clockwise, which is the default, or anti-clockwise, which would be go this way. And that's useful when you want to do like half circles, going this way, things like that. Now arc2 has the x and the y coordinates and the x and y2 coordinates and a radius. So we're basically going to have 2 points that we're going to specify, And then the radius will allow us to draw an arc from this point here, x1, y1, over to x2, y2. And I'll show an example of that as we get into the demos here. Now the same type of properties can be used if we want to come in and call fill on an arc. Then by default it's going to use black unless we specify otherwise. So we'll come in and normally define a fill style of, say, red or green. And if we just want to stroke an arc, we can call arc to define the arc first, then we call stroke, and based on the stroke style that we set, that would be the color that would be used to outline the border of that. So let's go ahead and jump into some examples of using the different rectangle and arc type functions with the HTML5 canvas.